Okay. Hello and welcome to our PEARS webinar where the maverick inventor Tal Golesworthy speaks. It's going to be a densely packed hour, so I'll keep this short and sweet. I'm here just to dispense the obligatory house rules. We're recording this webinar, and should you wish to remain incognito, then by all means switch your video icon off, which most of you have. It's on the bottom left of your screen. And so we have optimum sound. It would be wonderful if you could remain muted. The mute button is also there on the bottom left of your screen. Tal will speak for 30 minutes, after which we open the floor for questions. It's an intimate gathering and there should be time for everyone to have their say. To ask a question, you can just raise your hand or enter it through the chat feed. And if a question occurs to you later on after the webinar, then please do send it to us at the Marfan Trust and we can answer it for you. That's all. Thank you and welcome Dr. Child, our esteemed and eminent Chair and Medical Director.
Good morning, everyone. Well, we offer a warm welcome to Tal, who is a chartered engineer who also happens to have Marfan syndrome. When the time came for him to have his aortic root surgery, he felt the risk of 1 to 2% was too high. In genetic counseling, we advocate that this important decision should be made by the patient with the aortic surgeon after discussing all the options. Today, Tal will give us an update on the international use of the PEARS technique. Tal, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. Has that now worked? Are we all seeing the first slide of my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Lovely, okay, fine, I'll get going then. Thanks for that lovely introduction, Anne. And Victoria's reference to my maverick nature. I'm actually a chartered engineer with the Energy Institute and the Royal Society of Chemistry. I've spent my whole life in industrial research and development, so I'm most certainly not a medical practitioner. I put the logo of my company up on the front slide just to warn all you patients, I'm a dangerous, greedy, grasping device manufacturer. In fact, of course, when I set this project up, I couldn't raise funding from any other source than people I knew, so I had to start a company to fund the project to actually mend myself. And the slides won't advance, and isn't that lovely? Okay, what's going on here? Mr. Gates vomits in my kettle yet again. Oh, there you are. I'll do it that way. Okay, as I said, I'm a chartered engineer. So this is the sort of equipment I'm used to working on: dirty, nasty fabric filters outside dirty, nasty boiler houses. Just to let you know that I'm human as well and a patient just like you guys, a short summary of my expert patient status. That one, my PEARS op in 2004 being perhaps one of the more important ones. But I've had an endostent put in my LAD. And I've had ablation for atrial fibrillation, something which I'm sure a few of you have had. And most recently, in fact, just last month, I had a lens replacement in my one and only Marfan eye. So that was exciting. I'm very pleased to say the result's been extremely good. This all started thanks to Anne Child and my dad. My dad kept saying, we must go along to this genetic counselling thing. So we went along to St. George's to one of Anne's Marfan collect data on you chaps events in '92, and to my horror I found that my aorta was at 4.4 centimeters, where sort of 3.2 to 3.6 is considered the normal range by some, and 5 was the point at which surgical intervention was indicated. So that started me on an annual trip along to various hospitals for various measurements. And I'm sure many of you been through it will recognize these words. It was really not comfortable. Having the scalpel of Damocles hanging over your head is really uncomfortable. Anyway, in 2000, I reached the 5 centimeter mark, and I just thought, I got to do something about this. There's no way I'm having a root replacement. I'm just not doing it. So that I went along to the Marfan Info Day, as was then at George's, and challenged Professor Tom Treasure, who was then the professor of cardiothoracic surgery there, and said, look, what we should be doing is this. And what followed then was a feasibility study of about 4 years until I had my PEARS operation. Reason this graph stops here is I'm an engineer who measures variables. I don't measure constants. This number hasn't changed in the 18 years that I've had the device in me. Okay. This is I think the 15th anniversary 3 years ago, which is May the 24th, which is a couple of weeks away. And this was a meeting John Pepper arranged for us to have a treat out at the Athenaeum. So I finally got into the Athenaeum for lunch. So this is my good self. This is Mike Rubens, one of our radiologists. This is Tom Treasure, many of you recognize. Tom started the project with me as a cardiothoracic surgeon. This is our CAD engineer, Dr. Warren Thornton. This is John Pepper, who did the first 20-something PEARS operations. This is Rad, one of the radiologists. Andreas Hoshtytsky, who's done a number of PEARS ops. This is Connell Austin, who has now done more PEARS operations than anyone else on the planet. He's done about 200. He goes all over the place, proctoring new surgeons and all sorts. And this is our managing director, Peter Gibson. Okay, so the bit we're worried about is this one. This is the aortic root. You can see the left ventricle down here pumping blood up the left ventricular outflow tract. You can then see the aortoventricular junction. You can see 2 leaflets of the aortic valve opening there. This is the aortic valve complex. Above it is the sinotubular junction, and above that is the ascending aorta, which reaches up to the brachiocephalic artery in the arch. This is the bit which really suffers, and this is the bit which most of us have problems with. So this is the bit that we were really addressing. This is a horizontal view of me. This is a transaxial view, and you can very clearly see that there are 3 clear sinuses and leaflets to the aortic valve. You can't see the coronary arteries, but you can see that valve operating nicely. And that's actually a picture, that's an MR picture of my valve. So everything was working nicely before we started. Big problem, the aortic dilation, and again, we're really concerned here with the ascending aorta, this section, though there are others amongst us who suffer with their arch and their descending aorta, but we're just concerning ourselves with the ascending aorta, as I said. Aortic regurgitation is one of the first problems. If you stretch the sinuses too widely apart, the valve leaflets don't come together and your valve starts to leak, and that can cause a problem. Dissection is the next problem. That's when the inner 2 layers of the aorta split. That's the endothelium or intima and the media. It's medial, it's the genetic abnormality in our media which causes the Marfans amongst us the problems. And then the final problem is a rupture. In a sense, it's not a problem because you're probably dead before you hit the ground, so you don't really feel anything. I started this project on the simple premise that what I wanted to do was preserve everything. The aortic wall is quite good in compression, it's quite good in bend, it's only in tension where the fibrillin deficiency makes the wall weak, which is why your aorta stretches and dilates. So what I wanted to do was to see if I couldn't make an engineered made-to-measure external support that would perfectly fit the aorta right from the bottom, the aortoventricular junction, right up to the brachiocephalic artery. This would mean I would keep all of my own bits.
Listen to it.
Yeah, I keep all of my own bits, and it would mean I would not need a prosthetic valve, and I would not need any anticoagulation therapy. In 92, 93, I was only actually offered total root replacement, so that would have involved mechanical valve and anticoag. So this is what I set out to do. So the first part is relatively straightforward now. It wasn't then. We had to do all sorts of work. I spent about 15 to 20 hours in one of the MR scanners at the Brompton, which was, not without its discomfort. Now we have a standard CT scanning protocol. So you go along to your hospital, they put you in a scanner, they cardiac gate the scanner to acquire images in diastole when the heart is relaxed and the aorta is at its minimum diameter. They do use contrast agent, and we go from the left ventricular outflow tract that's just on top of the left ventricle, so below the bottom of the aorta, right to the top of the arch. And they come out as DICOM files, which we can then process in our software. Once we've got those data, we then take those data, and this is a typical CT image. Most of you recognize is this gray trilobal lump is an aortic valve, and this is probably a lung or a pulmonary artery or something. So what we then do is we take those data and we process them, and we produce a computer-aided design model. This red dotted line shows you the outside of our model, and the inner line shows the inside. And this gap, by the way, is 4 millimeters, so that you can see the quality of fit of our model to the actual anatomy is very good, very, very good. This is a side view, a sagittal view. And again, you can see here, the quality of fit is very good. So we start at the aortoventricular junction, the bottom of the valve. We have a little tube sticking out of the bottom with the patient data on, the name, the date of birth, and the hospital ID, to make sure the surgeon doesn't put the wrong device in the wrong person, which would be disaster. We go up round the valve. You can see the sinotubular junction is there, and then we run up the ascending aorta, and we actually go past the brachiocephalic. And again, if you look at the quality of fit of our model to the CT, how close is the red dotted line to the gray image of the aorta? It's very, very good. This is essentially what we're doing. We're taking image data from the real anatomy and we're turning it into one of these, which is a model, a computer-aided design model of your aorta. This is a bit of video of the CAD model of me. So you can clearly see the three sinuses of the aortic valve. That's the non-coronary sinus, that's the right coronary sinus, and that's the left coronary sinus. You can see that the coronaries are also marked. That's the right coronary ostium, and that is the left coronary ostium. So that gives you an idea of how good the quality of the CAD is, and it really is very, very good. Once we've done that CAD, we run that report of the anatomy in the CAD model past the surgeon. He signs it off. We then make a model of the aorta using a 3D printing technique. So this is a rigid nylon model of the aorta, of a particular aorta, and there's one of the coronary artery holes drilled through. This is then used as a former. We do one for every patient, because as you can see, every patient is different. I mean, this is just a selection of the hundreds of patients we've done. We're all different. Most of us have three sinuses, three sinuses of our aortic valve. Some of us have two, bicuspid people. We all have an ascending aorta. We all have two coronaries, though some will have one and some will have maybe four. But anyway, it's all individual, and this has to be absolutely bespoke to each patient because they're all different. Once we've made the formers for the patient, we then form on it the actual implant, the thing that will go inside you. This is made of polyethylene terephthalate, the same material that's used for making root replacement grafts, but this is not a hard, sharp, stiff, blood-proof textile. This is a very, very loose, open weave. It's actually a knitted device. We put an axial seam on it that runs all the way down so that the surgeon can open it and take it off the former. And when the surgeon gets this, he normally makes a couple of cuts in it and then cuts a little star-shaped hole over the one coronary ostium that will be about there, and then goes round the back to the other one. We normally sell 2 implants for each patient in case one becomes unusable, and we actually scale them on diameter slightly differently. If you have a little bit of aortic regurgitation caused by your dilation, and we put a 95% device on you, it just brings the sinuses back in together and reduces or recovers your aortic regurgitation. So that's another benefit that this treatment affords. This is one really for surgeons. As I said, the polymer type that we use is exactly the same in PEARS as it is in total or valve spring root replacement. We both use a multi-fill yarn, but we're using we're using a knitted, not a woven textile. And there are 2 really important differences. The edges of our device are very soft and pliant, so they are not going to damage a coronary artery. And it becomes completely incorporated because of its porous nature. This wouldn't be true of a standard root replacement graft, which is very, very hard and sharp and doesn't really properly incorporate. Surgical implantation, and this is lovely. This is a picture of John Pepper, who did the first 22 odd PEARS operations. He's actually doing the first operation here at FNKV in Prague with the director of surgery there, Petr Kačer. So the surgery is quite interesting. We do it largely on a beating heart. We don't need to use cardiopulmonary bypass, which reduces an insult for the patient. We don't need any hypothermia or cardiac arrest. Some surgeons choose to do it using CPP, using cardiopulmonary bypass, but they would do it on a beating heart. What this means is when you come round, you don't feel quite as awful as you would otherwise have felt because you haven't had a cardiopulmonary bypass priming fluid coursing around your veins along with the blood that's meant to be there. The next slide is a piece of video from surgery. So if you don't like blood, close your eyes. No, it's not. I took it out. Lovely. Okay, does it work? Well, this is a side view of my aorta from 2004. This is my sternum, and this is my spine. And so that's the shape you can see. AVJ at the bottom, sinuses, STJ, ascending aorta. This is 2014, and actually you can tell it's post-op because you can see the stainless steel wires in my sternum. So we can see that's the real one. I've religiously changed this second image year in, year out as the years have gone by, and I just got bored of it because they're all the same. The thing just doesn't change shape. The reason the two images are not absolutely identical is because you can't get a patient in exactly the same position in the MR scanner to get exactly the same plane view across the aorta as you would like. But to all intents and purposes, nothing changes. The reports all give exactly the same dimensions. It's completely dimensionally stable. No dilation, no aortic regurgitation, no dissection, no nothing. So where are we today? Well, actually, I've just had an email in to tell me we've done another operation in Brno in the Czech Republic. So we're actually 620 patients. We've got a total cumulative 1849 post-op patient years. I'm coming up for 18 years on the 24th of May. The 24th, that's a couple of weeks away. We've got 29 of us with more than 10 years and over 100 of us now with more than 5 years. Our youngest patient was a 3-year-old with an adult-sized valve that's now been secured. And our oldest patient was a 76-year-old. And so you can see we've done a whole range of patients through a whole series of ages. So what sort of disease types are we treated? Well, still, the single largest group in our 620 is Marfan syndrome. Interestingly, some patients presented with a mitral valve problem, which needed surgery. They had a slightly dilated aorta, which wouldn't have indicated aortic surgery, but the surgeon said, well, while we're mending the mitral valve, why don't we put a PEARS on and keep their aorta at a sensible size and a sensible function? So we've done quite a few Marfan syndrome patients with relatively small aortas, but who have been indicated for surgery by mitral repair. We've done quite a few Loeys-Dietz. A very interesting comment made by Massimo Caputo over at Bristol was, you know, Loeys-Dietz vascular tissue is totally treacherous. It's worse than Marfan. This is a great operation for them because we don't have to do any stitching, any suturing into the aorta. A lot of bicuspid valve cases have been done in relative terms by both trisinuate and bisinuate valves, and also a lot of idiopathic unknown dilation types. We have done a single tetraloephalangy. We've done quite a few actor 3s. The other cases really are specialist post-surgical cases with which we don't need to be too concerned, I think. On an intention to treat basis, you go to the operating theatre for PEARS. We've had 564 aortic PEARS cases, of which 551 have been treated with PEARS. The others have been principally conversions. The surgeon has found something he didn't like, or something else is inclined him to convert back to root replacement, either total or valve sparing. We've had one conversion to Florida sleeve, and we've had one perioperative death, sadly. But one death in 551 completed operations is a very low periop mortality rate. We've had one or two, I wouldn't call them redos. We've had one or two patients who didn't have the device quite correctly fitted. And so as a result of that, there had to be a redo operation. One young patient had slightly too large a hole cut around one of her coronary arteries, and she started to a little local aneurysm formed around the base of her coronary artery. So when she had a mitral operation, they repaired that. Another patient, for an unknown reason, had the device correctly fitted. She went into recovery. She then went into ventricular fibrillation. The axial seam was opened. She went back into sinus rhythm. It was all left alone. And a few years later, she had a local dissection on her non-coronary sinus over which the seam sits. So again, these aren't quite redos. The device was not correctly fitted and then went wrong. The device was incorrectly fitted and remedial action had to be taken. This is one of the most interesting parts of this presentation for my many. I think if every patient was shown this table, there would be a lot of people wanting PEARS and not quite so many wanting root replacement. Of course, it's very selfishly written from the point of view of a patient, that's me, not from the point of view of a surgeon. Total root replacement is quite challenging and quite difficult. Valve sparing root replacement is incredibly challenging and incredibly difficult. And I wonder how any surgeon was brave enough to actually take it on and start doing it. Clearly they were, and I salute them. PEARS has some serious surgical challenges. They're not the same as valve sparing root replacement, but it is not an easy thing to do. So having been lucky in our initial selection of some very good surgeons, we now have a very robust proctoring program in place. If a new surgeon wants to do this, he's got to go through our proctoring scheme, which makes sure that he does at least 4 operations with an experienced PEARS surgeon to make sure he has good results and no one suffers. Perhaps the other very interesting thing for me on this one is that, you know, we have the fallback of root replacement if we're in trouble. None of us have been in trouble. None of us have been converted back to root replacement having had a successful PEARS op. But it is nice to know that you've got a fallback situation. It took us 13 years to do the first 100 patients, 22 months to do the second 100 patients, 11 months to do the third 100, 11 months to do the 600, and it's now about 7 months. So the output is climbing, but it's taken me 22 years because I started this in 2000. And I must be completely mad to have stuck with it because it's been a long, hard grind to get to where we are today. But we're in a good place, and there are, you know, over 600 patients who are in a much better place than they would otherwise have been had they opted probably for root replacement. Sorry. These are our surgical centres as of today. Some are much more active than others. One in New Zealand has effectively closed down, which is a pity, but we're about to open another in New Zealand. The one in Malaysia has been fairly quiet. We've just opened a new centre in Czech Republic, and relatively recently 3 new centres in Slovakia. So it is getting easier for people to access the surgery. As per Anne's request, I've put up all the UK centres. I would point out to you that all of these centres are up on the Extent website. So don't worry about writing it all down. Just go to the Extent website, surgical centres, and you'll find them all there. So Mario, Andreas, and Connell are all operating in London. Massimo Caputo is operating in Bristol. Mohammed Nasser, very good surgeon, very keen at the Freeman in Newcastle. And Andrew McLean is active at Golden Jubilee. Renzo Passotto is a little bit quiet at Edinburgh. Alistair Graham has done probably about 18 at Royal Victoria Hospital. So wherever you are in the UK, you're probably not more than 200 miles from an active PEARS centre if you want to go and investigate that possibility. This is really a project summary that covers me from 2000 right up to the current day. What was key here was we had a multidisciplinary team. We had cardiologists, cardiothoracic surgeons, radiologists, process engineer, CAD engineer, and it was bringing those skills bases together, which gave us a new treatment, a viable new treatment in a very short time frame of about 4 years on an embarrassingly small budget. I would say this is a technically superior solution to root replacement of either variety. I have all my own bits. My intima sits there happily, my valve works happily, my aorta remains dimensionally stable. To be honest, I don't really need to take any drugs. I do take a beta blocker, a small dose of beta blockade. I do take an angiotensin receptor blocker, an ARB, but do I really need to take them? Well, probably not. It's just a bit of pharmaceutical, bottom covering, really. Massively reduced operative stress for patients. I mean, massively reduced. If you consider you have a valve sparing root replacement and you're on the table and you're for maybe 7 hours, you're on pump for maybe 3 hours, your body feels it when you come out. The first very short PEARS operation we had was Helen, one of my friends, Helen. She was a 21-year-old. She had PEARS surgery on Wednesday and she went home Saturday. I mean, I had my operation on a Monday as a 47-year-old, and I went home the following Monday and I felt pretty ropey, a week later. But operation Wednesday, go home Saturday. I mean, mind-blowing. I can't believe that you would be able to do that if you had had root replacement and therefore would have had to have been on cardiopulmonary bypass. I just can't believe you'd ever get out of the hospital in 4 days. The last point, probably the most important, as the population grows and money gets tighter, we've got to get better technical solutions of lower cost. Otherwise, the health systems will all collapse. There will be too many people, not enough money, too much of a call on those people, on those health care services, and we'll all be in trouble. I've benefited massively from the NHS. I have huge respect for what they've done. They've saved my life at least 3 times. It's not perfect. Bits of it need sorting out, but we are so lucky in this country to have access to the NHS. But we've got to help it, and help bringing the cost down like this will help it, and we need to be conscious of that. A lot of people to acknowledge. I'd have to put Tom Treasure at the top of the pile, because Tom Treasure at that information day in 2000 didn't just dismiss me as some crazy mad engineer. He sat down, he listened to me, he opened the door into the medical profession, and wow, look at it, 600 patients. John Pepper, nerves of steel to do the first 20 patients unproctored with so many of his jealous colleagues wanting to see him fail. What a star, what a star. And all the other surgeons, many of whom are personal friends. This has been a worthwhile endeavor. This has been a worthwhile endeavor. Right, that was nice and short and snappy to give you plenty of time for questions. Do look at the website. The website has some lovely patient experiences, which if you're awaiting surgery and feeling isolated and alone and frightened, they will give you great comfort. It's also got a list of all the surgical centres, so you can jump in there and find out which one is nearest to you in the UK. And best of luck with it. Okay, I'm done.
Anybody? Thanks. Victoria, have you got any questions from the patients?
We invited questions beforehand, and one person has been told their child is anatomically unsuitable for PEARS. The chest cavity is too small, apparently, but they're wondering whether they were told this because their doctor seems reluctant to offer PEARS.
I'm not a clinician, though I've been involved with something like 600 cases. I've seen a lot of what I politely call obstructive conservatism amongst surgeons and cardiologists who, because they don't know anything about it, don't want to get involved with it. I regularly get contacted by surgeons. A lovely one from Australia, a guy said he went to see a surgeon in Sydney, and he said, who was talking about valve sparing root replacement. And when the patient said, well, what about PEARS? He said, PEARS. PEARS is for surgeons that can't manage valve sparing root replacement, which was priceless. I think that your questioner probably should go and ask for a second opinion. I don't know the anatomy. I'm not an anatomist. It may well be that there's an issue with which I'm not familiar, which causes a problem. But I would say we have done some severe pectus excavatum cases. Quite a number. I can think of about half a dozen offhand. So the idea that the anatomy is not accessible, I think, is probably not very likely. It's possible, but it's not very likely. I would always say, go and get a second opinion. Go and see one of the PEARS surgeons in the UK and say, what do you think? Have a CT scan, take a look. What do you think? When I think back to the most severe pectus case that we did, I can't believe there would be anyone with a worse pectus that would have a less accessible aorta. But I may be wrong, because I'm not a clinician or an anatomist.
Okay, we'll ask them to seek a second opinion.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have questions for Tal?
Could I ask one about cost? Tal, how have you convinced the NHS to offer this to patients? Do they have a quota? Do they need letters of support? How does the patient go about?
The patient simply goes to one of the PEARS centres and says, I want PEARS, and the NHS pays for it.
I see.
We've tried to do a cost comparison between total root, valve sparing root, and PEARS, and I found it very, very difficult, because I don't think that the NHS really does a cost analysis on patient stream. It analyzes the costs of sort of beds and operating theatres and nurses and CPB machines, but it doesn't look at a patient going through horizontally and saying, right, okay, we need an MRI scan, we need a CT scan. So it's very difficult to cost. Our implant is much more expensive than a root replacement implant. Very roughly, a composite aortic root graft, that's a valve and the graft for total root, is about 3,500. Very roughly, a valve sparing root replacement graft is about 2,000. Ours is 7,500. So it's a lot more money for the implant, but the average operating time is 2 or 3 hours, play 6 or 7 hours. So as soon as you've come out of the operating theatre, the money you have saved the NHS in surgeon time, registrar time, operating theatre time, cardiopulmonary bypass time, perfusionist time, anaesthetist time, it's actually cheaper as soon as you come out of the operating theatre. Never mind the rest of your life where you never need any reoperation. If you look at valve sparing root, as you know, Anne, reoperations due to internal adhesions are always more difficult than one-off, first-off operations. And the reoperation rate for valve sparing root replacement is not zero. And so patients who have valve sparing root replacement have about a 1.3% per year probability of needing a reoperation. And so if you were to do a real honest costing across, say, 20 years of a patient post-operatively, you'd look at PEARS, you look at valve sparing, you look at total root, and you say, PEARS is cheaper. Okay, the implants are more expensive, but it's cheaper.
Yes, that's we have to convince the NHS.
Well, you know, at the centres we're in, they're convinced. They're running it, and they're quite happy to do it. I doubt whether anyone, even in those centres, though, is doing the analysis, which looks at their PEARS patients and then matches a group of root replacement patients and then does a cost comparison. They won't be doing, I don't think.
A couple of questions have emerged in the chat feed. Marie would like to know, do you think PEARS could prevent the descending aorta to bidissect because it's so soft, contrary to the Dacron graft?
Yes, I do. But I also think that the surgical access that you would require managing all of the multiple branching arteries would be so complex that if you were to look at this surgical viability of PEARS on the descending aorta versus the current endoluminal options, you just wouldn't even bother trying. Incidentally, we have done one patient where we supported his ascending aorta to his brachiocephalic, and because his arch was dilating, we then made another bespoke implant that ran from his brachiocephalic artery around his arch to the top of his descending aorta. So we can support the arch, but that's because there are so few arteries coming off it, and they're nice, big, and easy to see and easy to mobilize. Abdominal aortic aneurysm is another one I've been asked multiple times. I actually went along and stood in with Jonathan Earnshaw and watched him do a AAA operation. And again, if you look at the problems of surgical access to the abdominal aorta, you just say, we'll stick with what we're doing. It's so much easier. So whilst it is technically possible, it's impractical probably.
And another question, what is the manufacturing lead time?
It's a bit variable. We quote 6 weeks, but in fact, we've done quite a few in 2 weeks. That is from receipt of the CT scan, of course. You've got to get a CT scan first, and the hospital got to send this. Once we got your CT scan, if you were to guess about 4 weeks, that would be it. That would be pretty close. If you got lucky, it'd be 2, it'd be 3 or 4. It might be 5 if there were problems, but typically 4 weeks.
Thank you.
Could I ask another quickie?
Yeah, sure.
Just about age. I was really amazed to hear that at the Brompton they've done an 8-year-old, an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
And now you've mentioned a 3-year-old. Do you think that there is any lower age limits?
Age should not be an issue. The only issue should be aortic dimension. If you have an adult-sized aorta that is dilating that you want to support, it doesn't matter how young or old the patient is in, does it? It just doesn't matter. The 3-year-old that Nelson did at Brisbane, I mean, I winced when I looked at the CT of this patient. At 3-year-old, she's got an adult-sized aortic valve. So the key issue is is the dimension of the aortic structure you are attempting to support adult? If the answer is yes, doesn't matter what age the patient's in. You might remember, Anne, a youngster used to come along to the Marfan info days. He was 14, he was 6'6", he had about a 4.4 centimeter aorta, and his mum wanted him to have PEARS. And because of the rules of the Research and Ethics Committee license, Marfan syndrome, asymptomatic, 18 years plus, we couldn't operate on him. And I just said to him, look, I said, look, just pile as many beta blockers down you as you can, keep your cardiac output really low, and when you're 17 and a half, get yourself in the system and we'll do you. When he was 16, he dissected and had to have a total root replacement. Now, I think that was a fundamental error on the part of the local Research and Ethics Committee. That lad, for all that he was 14, had an adult-sized body and an adult-sized aorta, and he needed treatment, and we should have given him treatment. But as I say, the issue is the dimension. If you've got an adult-sized aorta, doesn't matter how young you are, get it fixed. I mean, if you're 3 with a, I don't remember the exact details, but I think she was about, I think her STJ was about 3.4, 3.6 centimeters, age 3. So Connell put a graft on her. He went from her AVJ up round a valve, up a part of her ascending aorta, and then left the graft open above, because the distal part of the ascending aorta was still relatively small and was still growing. The issue, as I say, the issue only is size. Is it adult sized? Yes. Is it dilating? Yes. Then support it. Doesn't matter what the age of the patient is.
Excellent. Are there any other contraindications, physical contraindications, that would make a surgeon look at a patient and say,
Well, I don't know the answer, but I suspect the answer is that there aren't. I mean, when you look at the disease types that we've covered, I mean, I was very surprised that it spread out in terms of disease type so quickly. Where we've had conversions away from it intraoperatively, they've nearly always been because some other issue has arisen. I think in anatomical terms, I don't think there are any limits. As long as you've got a decent CT scan. I mean, for example, we did a patient who had, I think, a genetic error that is uncharacterized and not understood. Her aorta had grown in length, right? It was in length, a little bit in diameter, but in length. And it was like a snake rolled up inside her chest. It was just unbelievable. And she had one coronary artery the size of your finger, one coronary artery. So we made up a graft for her. And the surgeon, in fact, put her on pump and cut a whole section out of her aorta, shortened it by about 7 inches, and then reduced it in diameter as well, and then put the graft on, and she's fine. We had another patient, probably Marfan, but maybe Loeys-Dietz, who had a double orifice left main stem, a double orifice coronary artery on the left coronary sinus, so sort of two arteries coming out together. And on the right coronary sinus, there was a single right coronary artery, and about 10 millimeters away, a pretty substantial conus artery. Now, I would say those are anatomical variants, but they were all taken in, they were all done and taken in hand. So I'm not sure of the answer to the question, but I think the answer probably is no. Particularly if you get in early enough. If you wait until things are too big and dangerous, then it all gets nasty. If you say this is prophylactic, you know, as soon as you're above 3.8 centimeters and you're still dilating, then we should fix you. If you wait until 5 or 5.5, you might be in a different situation.
Thank you.
Someone's asked, can the PEARS procedure be used if resurgery is needed following root replacement and valve sparing surgery? Hang on. If you've already had a root replacement, then we can't help you. You know, we're an alternative to root replacement. We can't go in after root. When you've had a root replacement, your aorta has been cut away. All you've got is a Dacron graft, so we can't help you in respect of that. But if you have a PEARS and you need a reoperation, you need an aortic valve put in, for example, we do a lot of bicuspid aortic valve cases where if the valve is adequately functional for the chosen lifestyle, but the aorta above is dilated, we will operate. Now, it may be in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time, that valve becomes not adequate in its function.
So can you do a valve replacement on that sort of patient? The answer is yes. In fact, as Tom Treasure brilliantly observed, Marfan and Loeys-Dietz vasculature is treacherous. It's so difficult to cut, and so it falls apart on you. I mean, I've seen photographs from Brno in Czech Republic, an aorta that was removed, and one of the surgeons held it up and took a photograph, and you could see through it. I mean, it was like a sheet of cling film. There was nothing to it. So it's difficult to deal with. Once the PEARS has gone on it and it's incorporated into it, if the surgeon has to go back in, he's actually dealing with something which is mechanically robust and stable and safe. He can suture it, he can cut it. So actually, far from making life more difficult, it actually makes life significantly safer. Okay.
Yes, and it's not a question, but a comment from a father whose daughter, 15, is scheduled for an op at the Evelina within the next couple of months. And he just wanted to say a heartfelt, pun intended, thank you to Tal for pioneering this treatment and thus greatly improving the life chances for Marfan patients.
Well, I'm always prepared to accept accolades when they are justified, but I have to say, it was actually Charles Pumphrey-Ann, you probably remember Charles, who taught me through total root replacement in 1993. And I can remember thinking, I'm not having that. Absolutely no way. So I did this out of basic animal fear. I did it in an entirely selfish, self-obsessed manner. It wasn't until I'd had my PEARS operation that I remember looking in the mirror and thinking, oh, we can start helping other people now. So whilst I would love to accept that very, very generous compliment, I don't really think I'm entitled to it. I'm very, very, very pleased that so many of us have been able to benefit from this. We had a patient in Scotland who'd had a liver transplant, I think, whose aorta started to dilate, and the team up there were very concerned about putting him on cardiopulmonary bypass, because they thought it was going to be a serious problem for him. So Connell was up, they said, just do an off-pump PEARS then. So the lad had an off-pump PEARS. I would say he's one of the people whose lives we have saved. For most of the other people, we've just improved their quality of life. And that's great. You know, I'm very privileged to be able to do it. Very, very privileged.
And Sophia would like to know, what was the process for testing the efficacy of the PEARS operation? And how did you feel? Were you nervous, confident before having your PEARS operation?
I was intimately involved in the entire feasibility study. I was at Imperial probably 4 days a week for 3 years. I was absolutely integral in organizing the scanning protocol, the CAD protocol. I actually chose 3 manufacturing processes, developed them all, and then went with the one. By the time I got to the point of having the operation, which I actually forced a date on John Pepper on, I was completely confident. John Pepper, brilliant surgeon. I've seen him operate at least 15 times. Absolutely superb surgeon. Complete confidence in the device. And the only point in the entire process that really scared me was the night before my operation, as John and I were filling in the patient consent form and trying to estimate the risk of the operation. John said, oh, by the way, if I can't do the PEARS, I'll give you a valve sparing root replacement. I thought, oh no, I really don't want a valve sparing root replacement. But no, I was pretty confident. I was nervous because everybody's nervous before surgery. If you're not nervous before your surgery, you need to go and see a shrink. There's something wrong with you. But I had no doubts that this was for me. I had complete confidence in the manufacturer of the device. I had complete confidence in John Pepper. Just a question of getting through the surgery. It sounds easy 18 years later. It wasn't quite so easy on the day, you understand.
I think the medical and surgical professions are very conservative when it comes to new techniques.
Yeah.
And this is because they're representing the patient. And if you're trying to decide on the best treatment, you have to weigh up risks. It's like having a balance. So what's the risk of the operation, the patient being lost during surgery, and to balance that, if you don't do anything, what is the risk of the patient dying of the disease?
Yeah.
And you have to wait until those 2 risks are equal before you can say it's worthwhile taking the operative risk in order to avoid the dissection risk. So you may feel a bit aggrieved that that the doctors have been very reluctant to accept this.
I entirely accept your points on that, Anne. But the problem is, how does anything new come about? If it's new and there is no data, everyone will say, "Oh, it's new and experimental. It's risky. We're not going to do it." Well, if all surgeries were perfect, I'd have no problem. But as you and I both know, they most certainly are not. How on earth is a new surgery going to get going unless someone like me says, right, get the bull by the horns and make them have it? 13 years to our first 100 patients, 13 years. You know, if Alan Sugar took me on The Apprentice, he'd sack me instantly for being a bloody failure. So I've got a big problem with obstructive conservatism stopping new things. If PEARS were not as good as root replacement, I'd be saying, yeah, well, you know, they were right. They should have been negative and told me to go away. But PEARS is, look at our clinical data and look at all the people who've got fantastic lives because they're not on warfarin and messing about with INR and all the rest of it. So I agree that surgeons have to be careful, but the problem is, how do we allow for a controlled and regulated introduction of new technologies? Because this is a great example of how a new technology has transformed the whole world of root replacement. Any number of people have said to me, this will become the gold standard. You know, how long it takes is another question, because we know surgeons, you know, aren't quite as open-minded as perhaps they could be, most of them. Yes. But it is an ethical problem, I agree.
And certainly contributing to the extended lifespan. I mean, you and I in the last 20 years have seen the average life expectancy in Marfan syndrome rise from 32 years to about 68 years. It's within the normal range now as a result of new research discoveries like yours. And, you know, with the beta blockers and all the other cardiac medications, the development of echocardiography to actually measure what's going on. First of all, the open heart surgery, and now your closed heart surgery. And so things are getting better and better. And thank you for that. Back to you, Victoria. Any other questions?
Nothing's emerged on the chat feed. I'm just scrolling through the gallery. No one seems to have their hand raised.
Robin, your son's been operated with this device. How is he coping?
He's doing very well. I haven't bothered him to let him know I'm looking at this webinar today because he's revising for his GCSEs. But yeah, he's doing fantastic. And I have to say, his surgery, his time down in theatre was a lot longer. I think it was about 12 hours on the first occasion he was in theatre. And for some reason, his heart rate didn't stabilize initially. So they took him down the day after again to investigate why that might have been. Found nothing, but when he came out again, he was fine. His heart rate did stabilize, and ever since, he's been great. Yeah, very good. So he's doing all of the things he wants to do, basically.
How has it affected him psychologically? Do you think it's changed his attitude towards planning career and activities?
No, I think because he was diagnosed very young, he's grown up being used to the knowledge that he's got something there, and we go on a lot of hospital visits, and yeah, he just accepts it as a day-to-day thing. I don't think, you know, it doesn't restrict him a great deal either from what he wants to do. But that could be partly because his expectation level is tempered by the knowledge, but he still does sport. You know, he loves football, for example. So he broke his finger the other day playing football, for example. No, it hasn't. I don't think it restricts him at all, particularly.
So few restrictions.
Yeah, getting clothes is perhaps a restriction. Shoes in particular.
Shoes, God. It's got a lot better in recent years, though, hasn't it? I mean, I can remember I was 13 in 1969, and I reached size 12 shoes and 30-inch inside leg jeans, and I couldn't get shoes or trousers to fit me. And I really hate shopping now because I had so many trips around every wretched shop in the town, and there was nothing ever there. Better now because there are so many others with better, I guess, better diets given a lot of people greater height. So that is better. But yeah, that was from ski boots. Big problem. Ski boots got to get made to measures.
Yeah. Yeah. Hadn't thought of that. If we go skiing.
Well, if a patient watching this webinar thinks, I'd like to see a surgeon about that, how do they go about it? Do they go through their GP who may know nothing about PEARS?
Yeah, their GP won't know anything about it, of course. Situation normal. Marfan syndrome, what's that? But no, if they ask their GP, if they go onto the website, the Extent website, find the nearest surgical centre, and then go and see their GP and ask for a referral to that cardiothoracic surgical department or that surgeon, they should be able to get it. Don't forget, we're all entitled to go wherever we want for our treatment in the NHS, and we're also entitled to ask for a second opinion. And so we should all do that.
Gareth has just asked, what is the current aortic root diameter size before one should consider potentially having a PEARS procedure performed?
Depends on what your disease type is, depends on your family history, depends on lots and lots of things. These arbitrary numbers are a little bit misleading. If we really understood the structural deficiencies of a given piece of aortic wall, we could work fairly safely with fixed numbers, but we don't. I mean, we've had, whilst I was doing the feasibility, I'll never forget, I came across one patient who had dissected at 3.6 centimeters, and I came across another patient who hadn't yet dissected at 7.5 centimeters. So it really does depend. Look at your family history if you've got any. If you're a bicuspid aortic valve, you can go pretty big, and they don't. It's not a problem. Our biggest BAV case had an ascending aorta, I think, of 6.4 centimeters, which had a PEARS on it off pump and is completely stable. If you've got Marfan, you don't want to be going. You certainly don't want to be going above 5. You should be looking maybe for thinking about it at 4.5. If you've got Loeys-Dietz, which is notoriously less stable than Marfan, then perhaps you should be looking at a number smaller than that. I turn it on its head and turn it the other way around and say, what's the normal, maximum aortic diameter for an adult? Well, the data I have, which I haven't really looked at hard, suggests about 3.2 to about 3.6 centimeters. Well, if you're above 3.6 centimeters, you're above what is probably the normal maximum. And if you're still dilating, then you should be thinking, I ought to do something about this, because while your aorta is a nice shape, the anatomy isn't too badly stretched, the valve works, everything else works. If you've got an option like this, which is relatively safe, it makes sense to fix it while it's working. If you say, oh, I can leave it, and you wait until it's 5.5, and then you get a dissection, all of a sudden, you can only have root replacement. You've cut your options down. So I wouldn't be, there's a natural inclination not to want to do anything. I understand that. But given the options that we've got available to us now, we should really be looking at anything above a normal adult maximum 3.6 or 3.8 centimeters and saying, well, if you're above the max and you're dilating, it isn't just going to miraculously stop. You're going to have to do something about it. And we should be then, investigating, doing our research, planning, and then maybe having an op when we're at 4 or 4.5 or something. That would be, a safe way of approaching it. You can leave it. You can play Russian roulette and leave it until it's 5. You can do that, and a lot of people will get away with it. But some people won't. If you're one of the ones who isn't going to get away with it, not a place you want to be, really, is it?
I think there's a very active research program at the Brompton to see these cases that have been operated on, to go back and look at their CT scans and their MRI scans and see if there's some way of predicting those who are at a greater risk, even at a low diameter. And we're joining in with that with Jose Aragon Martin's research program of mapping the Marfan gene. And certainly there are areas where mutations can cause much more severe aortic disease.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we'll probably come up with a formula in future years to predict those patients who should be
Yeah.
operated
Yeah.
at low aortic root diameter.
Yeah, but clearly our understanding is imperfect, and because of that, we can't actually predict at the moment. But as our understanding gets better, we will be able to better predict, and that's going to be very, very helpful. That will save a lot of grief. It'll probably save deaths, and it'll probably also save money, because those of us who don't need the surgery won't have it. It'll only be those who need it. So the number needed to treat, which is, we think this person's at risk, we'll operate on them, and then you find out they would never have had the problem anyway. The number needed to treat will come down much, much, much more closely reflecting the number that you actually need to protect, and that will be good news for everybody.
And the larger the number of patients internationally, the lower the risk will be.
Yeah.
Therefore, you can start offering it at a younger age, which is what's happening, of course.
Yeah. 3. How's that for a young age? It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It is, really.
I mean, I just felt so sorry for that little girl. I just thought, if I were the parent, had I been the parent of that child, I would, knowing what I know, I would have been terrified. An adult-sized aorta at 3 years old.
And I know the surgeons and yourself have been around the world teaching, which is amazing. And I spoke to John Pepper the other day, and he said he was learning Russian. So I said, is that in case Putin actually invades Britain? And he said, no, I've made a very close friend of the Russian cardiac surgeon whom I've been teaching the PEARS technique.
Lovely.
So I was much relieved. I mean, they've made real friends. They want to be able to speak to each other properly instead of just operating together. So it really is a worldwide movement.
Yeah, we run a very strict proctoring scheme. We won't just sell these implants to people. You've got to run through the scheme. You've got to be proctored on at least 4 cases by an experienced proctor surgeon that we provide. That's got to be done. This is tricky surgery. Connell Austin and I went over to Brazil a couple of months back. We did 3 cases over there, and the 3rd case had lost her mum in a valve sparing root replacement, a total root replacement, sorry, about a year before. There'd been some complications. She'd never made it out of hospital, and she'd come down with about this patient had come down to Porto Alegre with about 7 of her family, and they were all absolutely terrified. It was, you begin to understand what it is you're actually doing, when you see people in that state. But after her op, they were absolutely done. She's back to work now. She's only about a month post-op. She's back to work, and she works for a company who organize the testing, the clinical trialing and regulation of drugs and devices in Brazil, and she's determined to get PEARS regulatory approval in Brazil for us. So, there's a whole country of people who would be, for me, it's all about choice. I do this because I believe every patient deserves to have all of the choices: total root, valve sparing root, PEARS. Now, if they want a total root replacement, I might question their sanity, but I'm not going to question their choice. It's absolutely their choice. But if you're never given the choice, I see so many stories of people, oh, I'm having my root replacement done tomorrow. Oh, my surgeon's brilliant. He's one of the best in the world. And I think, I wonder if this bloke has actually heard about PEARS. I don't want to upset people. I don't want to pee people off. But, surgeons have got to let patients know this is an option. And if they don't know it's an option, how are they going to feel when they come out of hospital after 3 weeks feeling like crap, and they see there's some better option they could have had? It isn't good. It isn't good. Patients deserve to be given all of the options, all of the choices, all of the pros and cons, short-term and long-term, and then help to make their own mind up.
Well, I think we'll all agree on that. Victoria, any more questions, Victoria?
No, nothing in the chat feed, and no raised hands, and it's 1:30.
So would you like to thank Tal properly on behalf of all of us?
Thank you very much, Tal.
That's a pleasure, Victoria.
Presentation. You're a maverick inventor, and we've got some unique insight into your procedure. And you're going to open our Marfan Information Day on Saturday, the 9th of October.
I look forward to that very much.
And if people have questions, if something occurs to somebody, then please do email me at info@marfantrust.org with your question for Tal. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And I like your tie with the heart motif.
Ah, well, there you are. That's a blast from the past. Do you recognise it, Anne?
Is it British Heart?
No, it's the old Marfan Association.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I've got one, and I only bring it out on very special occasions.
Ah,
Congratulations. Well, we hope to have a long association with
And
yourself and your program.
Don't forget, on the 24th of May, which is week Tuesday, raise a glass. It's the 18th anniversary of the first PEARS op on me, and it's still going strong.
I think you'll get a lot of cards.
I think I was right. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, sorry, I think Ludi had a question, Tal, in the chat box. He's asking, could you give the name of the surgeon who operated on the 3-year-old?
That was Connell Austin, proctoring Nelson Alfonso at the Queensland's Children's Hospital in Brisbane in Australia. So unless you're living in Brisbane, it's probably not much use to you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Nice to see so many smiles. So many of these presentations are dull. You've got to try and fire them up a little bit, you know. So
Thank you so much on
Good.
behalf of all of us.
my
And,
pleasure. My pleasure.
Victoria will make sure that this recording goes on our website and that it's available for everyone who has attended the conference. Is that correct?
Yes, we will email a copy to all those who attended or who bought tickets. So
We hope to increase the number of patients who hear about your work.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye,
Bye now.
everyone.
Bye.
thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.